What if the woman you just humiliated was actually your boss? In just 9 minutes, a story unfolded inside the grand marble lobby of one of Seattle's most prestigious hotels. A black woman, dressed in plain clothes, walked in with quiet confidence and walked out as the most powerful person in the building. But between those two moments, she was profiled, mocked, humiliated, and even robbed of her dignity by the very staff who should have served her. But this isn't fiction. It's not drama. This is a true story, one that shattered the glass ceiling, rewrote company policy, and exposed systemic discrimination in one of America's largest hospitality brands. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand recognition. She just waited. And when the final minute came, she didn't call security. She fired the entire front desk team. On the spot, in front of everyone. But the story doesn't end there. What followed next was a company-wide reform, a wave of internal audits, national media coverage, and a brand new legacy carved into the heart of an industry long overdue for change. So before you judge someone based on their clothes, their color, their silence, watch this story. Because in the next 9 minutes, you'll witness what happens when the power of respect meets the truth of identity. This is not just a viral moment. This is a turning point in corporate America. This is Aisha Carter's story. And you're about to remember her name. What do you feel when an entire room goes silent, yet you're the one who didn't belong? Every eye in the Grand Horizon Grand Hotel lobby froze on Aisha Carter the moment Gregory Vance barked, "Get out of my lobby." This place isn't for your kind. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, loud, rehearsed, and punctuated by the echo off the marble. Gregory, 48 years old, manager of one of Seattle's most prestigious hotels, crossed his arms like a wall between her and her rightful place. Behind him, 2 clerks, Lauren and Kevin, mirrored judgment. They didn't even hide their contempt. A statement, not a question. A verdict, not a caution. Who is she? Aisha Carter, casually dressed, sneakers whispering on polished stone. No flashy labels, no entourage, no designer bag. Just confidence and clothes that could have passed for anyone's after a long flight. Yet, in that moment, her plain black t-shirt and fitted jeans became something unfamiliar to them. To semantics, she didn't look like someone who stayed here. So they said it aloud. 9 minutes later, she would fire Gregory and every single staff member right there in that marble lobby. But not yet. First came shock. First came that sentence. Imagine walking into your own lobby and hearing you don't belong. A visceral freeze. This moment stopped guests. They froze mid-step. Eyes widened. Phones rose. Cameras found what mattered, not her demeanor, but the way Gregory framed her as an interloper. It was theatrical, malicious. Yet Aisha didn't gasp. She didn't explode. She didn't crumble. She answered evenly, "I have a reservation. Penthouse suite. My name's Carter." She slid her ID forward. Black card, embossed with a sleek gold logo. It glinted in the lobby's chandelier light, an understated symbol of ownership. Gregory picked it up with 2 fingers, handling it like fragile china or a hot potato. He flipped it over, inspected it. He scoffed when he handed it to Kevin. "This looks suspicious." And then the phrase came, "This looks suspicious." Strange, isn't it? Suspicious how? Because she doesn't look like a hotel owner? Because she wears jeans instead of a gown? Because they forgot to check their bias? Lauren hit the intercom. "Security." We may have an unauthorized guest trying to access one of our premium suites." A murmur slid through the lobby. Another guest paused mid-step. Aisha said, calm as dawn, "I'm not here for trouble. I'm here for my room." This wasn't a policy issue. This was a power play. At that moment, a travel blogger named Sophie Lynn began filming. Jacob Reed whispered into his phone, "We're at the Horizon Grand in Seattle, and we're watching something ugly happen in real time." A whisper became a live stream. A jazz riff of dissent sparkled in the air. Elena Ruiz, concierge, looked over. Her eyes locked with Aisha's. Almost imperceptibly, a flicker passed. Recognition? Empathy? Understanding? She stepped forward, but Gregory cut her off with a snarl. "She doesn't belong here." The lobby was the stage. Gregory, the villain. Aisha, the calm storm. Cameras were the witnesses. Mr. Vance might have thought he was in control. But when you attempt to erase someone right in front of dozens of strangers with phones in their hands, you don't just humiliate them. You announce that you have something to hide. Nothing in that lobby would ever be the same again. The ripples from those words spoken with such arrogance would quiet the marble, churn the crowd, and ignite a reckoning nobody saw coming. So I ask you, reader, what would you do if you were told you didn't belong in a place you owned? If that question gave you pause, then welcome, because this is only the beginning. Silence fell in the lobby. Not the quiet that follows a lecture, but the sharp hush of tension. Aisha Carter, still calm, still composed, her black t-shirt and jeans unassuming, lifted a finger and tapped her phone screen. No words, just a silent signal. But in that moment, it carried more weight than any declaration, louder than any accusation. Her executive assistant, Nia Thompson, was just 3 blocks away at corporate headquarters. At the tap, she snapped alert. No pauses, no hesitation. The system sprang to life. Cameras in the lobby began to stream directly to the corporate monitoring dashboard. Standard protocol turned into emergency. It was the moment that shifted the balance. Meanwhile, Gregory Vance's expression had hardened. He held the black card in his hand, spinning it between his fingers as if it were a fragile token of prestige. "We've seen this scam before," he said, his voice loud enough for the front desk to echo. "People come in, flash a high-limit card, and try to sneak in." The insult was in the implication. Aisha was a liar, a con, someone beneath suspicion. But Aisha didn't rise to the bait. Her voice remained measured, her tone neutral. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here for my room." She slid her reservation confirmation across the desk, calm but unyielding. Gregory frowned and glanced to Lauren and Kevin, who mirrored his skepticism. Lauren pressed the intercom button. Her voice carried through the lobby. "Security. We may have an unauthorized guest trying to access one of our premium suites. Possibly fraudulent." The word possibly hung in the air like a threat. The lobby tensed. Other guests paused in their conversations, phones lifted to record the escalation. From the sidelines, Sophie Lynn and Jacob Reed, vloggers and live streamers, were already documenting every micro-expression. Sophie whispered, "This is being posted. People need to see this." Jacob swept the camera across the lobby. Aisha, still calm. Gregory, rigid with authority. Lauren, ready to pounce. Kevin, silent, but ready to follow. Elena Ruiz hesitated. She glanced at Aisha with something like recognition. But Gregory cut in. "She doesn't belong here," his voice final. And that's when it happened. Aisha raised her phone again. Silent tap. And Nia's voice entered the lobby, crisp, and confident. Systems ready. People around her heard it through the phone's speaker, like the prelude to a verdict. The guests, already on edge, leaned in. Something deeper was happening. Behind screens in the corporate office, Nia typed commands. Reservation files popped up, verification codes. Aisha's name appeared, glowing. Carter, penthouse suite, VIP owner level override. The system granted access. A status change blinked into existence. Back in the lobby, Gregory sensed the shift. He froze, card still in hand. The screen inside the safe was updated. On Kevin's face, confusion flickered as he realized the magnitude of what just unfolded. The switch had flipped without fanfare, but it carried thunder. Aisha's phone lit up. She didn't need to glance down to know. Systems ready was more than a message. It was an announcement. She'd been validated. Not maybe, not possibly fraudulent, but legitimately the owner. The phrase echoed louder than the intercom ever could. Lauren stepped forward and tried again, voice faltering. "You need to leave now." Kevin leaned toward the cabinet, as if to retrieve something proof, maybe his authority. But Elena, seeing the tides turning, edged forward, as well quietly but steadily. Meanwhile, Jacob's live stream count was going wild. "This is being shared everywhere," he muttered into the camera. Sophie's camera caught every moment. Lauren's trembling fingers, Gregory's steel-jawed stare, Kevin's hesitation, Elena's subtle shift in posture. The silent signal that one tap from Aisha had begun the unraveling. It was invisible, no explosion, no dramatic reveal. But the power in that gesture was undeniable. Behind each polished surface and gleaming marble was an entire network, ready, synchronized, waiting for validation, for proof, for the truth to come out. And in those minutes, as Aisha stood unwavering, several truths began to unravel. Her identity wasn't a matter of manners or fashion. It was confirmed by inner systems, behind locked doors, through verified channels. The assumptions. "You don't look like someone staying here," were about prejudice, not policy. Real authority doesn't roar. Sometimes it simply logs itself into the records. As the lobby watched, the undertow pulled them into a collective awakening. Aisha's silent tap and Nia's quiet confirmation. Systems ready. That was the signal that the game wasn't coming. It had already changed. 9 minutes remained until she made the final move. But by then, the lobby had shifted. It was no longer a stage for humiliation. It was gearing up for a reckoning. Kevin Patel moved with exaggerated certainty, as if his footsteps alone were proof of his right to decide. He opened the cabinet behind the counter and revealed a brushed steel safe, small, cold, precise. The gesture was loud, even though the safe didn't make a sound. Gregory's voice rang out, thick with condescension. "We're locking this up. Until the bank verifies it, you're not getting it back." He said it like a teacher scolding a child. Except this wasn't a child, and this wasn't a school. This was a luxury hotel lobby. And the "it" in question wasn't a misplaced homework sheet. It was Aisha Carter's personal black card. As Kevin placed the card inside the safe, the sound of the steel door clicking shut was soft. But in that softness lived something sharper than noise. It was the sound of arrogance solidifying into theft. Sophie Lynn's voice cut through the air from across the lobby. "They just took her card." "That's theft!" Her camera zoomed in. "You're all seeing this, right?" Jacob's live stream view count had crossed 2,000. Comments were rolling in. "Fast, is this real? Unbelievable. Call a lawyer." Still, Aisha didn't flinch. Her hands were by her side, her breathing steady. She looked straight at Kevin, then Gregory. "You're going to regret this," she said, not as a threat, but as a fact. A quiet one. The kind that echoes longer than shouting. Gregory snorted. "You think you scare us?" he spat. "This isn't about feelings. It's about fraud." He looked around the room as if expecting applause. None came, only eyes watching, phones raised, curiosity curdling into disgust. To them, it wasn't just a policy gone wrong. It was a scene, a statement. A woman black, alone, in plain clothes, treated like a criminal while holding a valid reservation, a legitimate ID, and a real card. Kevin returned to the desk and leaned in, the smirk never leaving his face. "That card?" he said. "It's now company property." He turned slightly toward the growing crowd. "Until we verify, it stays in the safe." He held up the key like a trophy. "This is protocol." But it wasn't. Not when the card had already been verified by the system. Not when the name on the card matched the name in the reservation file. Not when the system override had been triggered by Aisha herself because she had executive-level access. Lauren folded her arms. Her eyes moved from Kevin to Gregory and back to Aisha. "You're wasting everyone's time," she said. "There are real guests waiting." She didn't even hide it, the implication that Aisha wasn't real enough. Jacob pointed at the safe from his stream. "Look at this!" "This is what racism in a suit looks like." Another guest whispered, "She hasn't even raised her voice," as if that somehow made it harder to believe she was in the right. Because too often, people assume the calm one is guilty, and the loud ones are right. But Aisha's power came from silence, not submission, control. In the corner, Elena Ruiz stood frozen, conflict in her eyes. She had seen the reservation, she had recognized the override, but she also knew what standing up in that moment would cost. And yet, her gaze kept flicking between Aisha and the safe. Kevin tapped the key on the desk like a game show buzzer. "Guess you're out of luck." "No," Aisha said softly. "You are." She pulled out her phone again and pressed her thumbprint. The signal was sent. This time, not to Nia, but to Carla Bennett, Horizon's Director of Legal Operations. The escalation had begun. Meanwhile, a mother and daughter stepped back from the check-in line. The mother whispered something, her brows furrowed. The daughter took out her phone and began recording. The room was shifting slowly at first, then all at once. It no longer felt like a five-star lobby. It felt like a trial. And Aisha? She wasn't the one on the stand. From her phone came a quiet ding, a message from Nia. "Incident log active. Legal team watching." All actions being recorded. Aisha didn't say anything aloud. She didn't need to. But Gregory felt it, the loss of control. And for the first time, so did Kevin. His fingers twitched. He tried to joke. "You really thought that card was yours?" But the laugh didn't land. Not with the guests. Not even with Lauren. Jacob zoomed in on Kevin's hand, still holding the safe key. "That's evidence now," he muttered to his live stream. "That's what corporate theft looks like." And then, for the first time since it all began, Aisha stepped closer to the desk, not aggressive, not dramatic. Just close enough that her presence filled the space they had tried to erase her from. "You didn't just lock up my card," she said, her voice level. "You locked up your futures." Aisha Carter stood in the lobby of her own hotel, watching 3 of her employees try to humiliate her in public, and smiled. The safe was closed, but the doors of consequence had just opened. The lobby wasn't a courtroom, but in that moment, it functioned like one. Gregory Vance, with his badge gleaming and voice risen, had underestimated one thing: the power people have when they hold their phones out. Cameras blinked to life across the marble foyer, and the shift began. Sophie Lynn, alert and tactical, kept her phone steady. Her hands shook, but her voice was unwavering. "This is being posted. People need to see this," Jacob Reed, inching closer, narrated into his live stream. "We're at the Horizon Grand Hotel, watching this unfold in real time." His view count rose with every breath. 1,200, 1,500 comments flooded in. "Is that the owner? This is wrong. You can't treat someone like this." Aisha Carter didn't give them direction, but the guests did. Phones rose, hands trembled, eyes widened. In every corner of that lobby, people became witnesses, unwilling participants in something much bigger than a guest dispute. Elena Ruiz, the concierge who had seen it all before, found her voice again. She'd recognized Aisha's name in the system that morning. Now, in front of dozens of strangers, she spoke not in apology, but in truth. "Her reservation is valid." Lauren glared, but Elena didn't shrink. The guests were listening. Lauren tried to regain control. "You need to leave now." Her tone dripped with authority, but the crowd bristled. A small murmuring wave started. A guest beside her whispered to another, "She's the owner." Another, "We're recording this." The tension crackled. Gregory's grip on his power slipped. Smugness cracked into uncertainty. He looked to Kevin for support, but Kevin's smirk had faded. His confidence faltered. He glanced at the safe, at the key in his hand, at the phones trained on him. The optics, suddenly, were turning against him. Aisha's voice cut through. "You've just made the worst mistake of your professional life." Not with anger, with certainty. A statement carrying more weight than threats, more impact than accusations. It broadsided Gregory's authority with facts. A hush settled an expectant silence. But behind the hush, the stream from Jacob's phone continued rolling. Guests leaned in closer. The public eye had arrived, uninvited, but powerful. Gregory, panicked, tried to salvage, "This isn't about personal attacks. It's protocol." But the crowd didn't relent. A mother lifted her toddler's hand. A businessman lowered his briefcase and whispered to those next to him. Elena watched with tears trapped behind her. Calm. She'd done what no one in management dared. She had spoken truth. Suddenly Kevin's voice wavered. "This card is now company property," he repeated, but the conviction had collapsed. The guests laughed, soft, cynical laughs. One guest raised her phone. The screen flashed, "Owner confrontation at Horizon Grand." At that moment, something inside Aisha changed. Not her expression still composed, but her energy shifted. No longer defensive, poised to recreate the narrative. Lauren, sensing defeat, reached for Aisha. Hand outstretched, a physical contact to force removal. But Elena walked around Lauren and stepped between them. "You can't put your hands on a guest," she said firmly. "Her reservation is valid." Gasps rippled. Lauren froze her arm, stalled midway. Gregory's stare widened. The lobby, once split by fear and bias, began to unite in truth. Phones captured that moment. Elena standing firm. Guests snapping photos. Jacob's live stream caption scrolling, "Concierge stands with the owner." Lobby turning, thousands watched. Comments poured, "Power belongs to who demands respect. This is what equity looks like. Finally, someone in charge." For the first time, Gregory felt his authority drilled into the ground. His calm facade cracked. He stammered, She's trespassing. She's lying. The words fell weak. The lobby no longer listened. They yearned for her proof. Aisha didn't budge. She didn't need to shout. She just raised her chin. Phones recorded every detail. Candor shone through every pixel. Then came the twist public acknowledgement delivered with precision. Elena nodded. She saw you're right, she signaled to Aisha silently. A wave in the sea of voices. The lobby transformed into a witnessed movement. What started as humiliation turned into validation. What began as a solitary woman fighting injustice morphed into collective accountability. And so, in that pivotal moment, when people began sharing, streaming, standing, the game changed. Ownership isn't just legal. It's perceptive. It's communal. Phones didn't mute. Voices didn't fall silent. The guests had found their voice, and in doing so, they magnified hers. In the courtroom of public opinion, Aisha had already won. Aisha Carter stood still as the lobby flooded with witnesses. Every phone trained on her, and every whispered name loomed bigger than any badge. The clock ticked on, but not for applause. It counted down to justice. 9 minutes remained. Gregory Vance shuffled behind the desk, attempting to restore the illusion of authority. He cleared his throat, voice brittle. "If you don't leave now, I'll call security again." But the murmurs in the crowd had already grown. In those murmurs lay solidarity, outrage, validation. He couldn't shout over them. He couldn't drown them. They were louder than his commands. Lauren, her blazer stiff and white-knuckled, stepped forward, her voice shaky. "You're causing a scene for no reason." Her words sounded hollow, even to her. The reservation board behind them glowed innocently. "Carter, penthouse suite. Confirmed." The evidence was on the wall. Elena had moved decisively into the open, stepping side by side with Aisha. She grabbed the ID that had been tossed onto the desk, swiped it again in front of warming onlookers. It read, "VIP Owner." Her gesture was quiet, but seismic. At that moment, with guests leaning forward, the public-facing staff shifting under the weight of scrutiny, Aisha nodded softly. Her assistant's voice crackled through via speaker. "Terminate Gregory Vance. Terminate Lauren Hayes. Terminate Kevin Patel. Effective immediately." A single sentence triggered an avalanche. Gregory's mouth dropped open. Lauren's expression turned as pale as the marble behind her. Kevin's face contorted in disbelief. Their badges buzzed, red deactivated. Access permissions evaporated. The system she had primed with Naya seconds before had executed her command. It happened quickly. Too quickly for shouting fits, beyond expectations or whispers. In 9 minutes, count them. She had gone from humiliated guest to decisive CEO, executing real consequences. No dramatics, no public spectacle. All done within the glass walls of her lobby. The quiet authority of her voice commanding legal, procedural, irrevocable landed harder than any scream. It was justice in action. Guests gasped. Some whispered prayers of vindication. Others pulled out phones to capture every second. Some called loved ones mid-scene. Headlines were in progress. Black CEO fires inept management. Justice served in 9 minutes. Aisha lifted her chin. She was still calm, but now her composure carried a different weight. It was controlled power, the kind born of years of being dismissed, overlooked, profiled. She had mastered calm. Now she wielded it. Elena, voice steady, announced, "These employees are no longer part of Horizon Grand. I stand now as Acting Guest Services Director." The crowd applauded, not loudly but with measured respect. They recognized that it wasn't a show. This was a moment of accountability. Kevin, former front desk clerk, backed away, trembling. Lauren dropped her head, eyes filling with tears. Gregory clenched the desk edge, his ego pierced by his own failure. No staff member tried to argue anymore. Their power had evaporated. In the watershed moment, a woman near the back whispered, "This is the beginning of something different." And it was. Reform flickered to life, born not from press releases, but through real-time consequence, right in front of dozens of witnesses. And then Aisha took a breath slow, grounded. She looked around at guests, at streaming phones, at Elena at her side, and addressed the lobby. This isn't revenge. This is a reset. A reminder that policy without empathy is just oppression. That identity shouldn't determine respect. That every person checking in should be treated with dignity. Her words rang clear, crisp. They weren't for the crowd. They were for every staff member, past, present, or future, whose judgment might come before their kindness. The clock's 9 minutes were over. Her reckoning had arrived. The staff had been terminated. The hotel had changed hands, not by force, but by rightful authority. And the guests' victims turned witnesses had seen it all. As corporate personnel began streaming in to support the lobby's reconfiguration, Nia's voice came faintly over Aisha's shoulder. Media relations is live. Compliance audit starts now. Training protocols are being rewritten. Summary in 30 minutes. The infrastructure of reform was already mobilizing. Aisha nodded at Elena, her quiet partner in this upheaval. Elena gave a small, steady smile, a reassurance that those 9 minutes had changed not just a job, but a culture. Outside, cameras recorded the scene through marble windows. Inside, Aisha stood tall. 9 minutes had revealed another truth. Leadership defined by courage is greater than power corrupted by prejudice. The lobby's atmosphere was no longer charged with hostility. It thrummed with expectation. Something sacred had just shifted in that room. The hum of whispered disbelief faded, replaced by something more potent. Purpose. A culture had been shaken, and now reform was rising. Aisha Carter stood tall, her voice steady, looking out across the room. She didn't hustle to fill the silence. She simply held it, let it resonate. Guest chatter softened into quiet reverence. She spoke again, this time not at employees, but to every soul present. We will listen now. Real reform starts today. A murmur ran through the lobby, like breath passing through an old chandelier. Phones still recorded, but not for scandal. They recorded transformation. Every face in the crowd, tourist, business traveler, family, hotel staff, shared the realization. This is how change begins. Elena Ruiz, once a concierge, now introduced herself as Acting Guest Services Director. She cleared her throat and addressed the remaining staff and guests. Her voice was firm. Starting this moment, she announced, we're implementing immediate training for every frontline employee. Bias recognition, empathy, guest dignity. Every check-in will go through a new standard. Aisha nodded in quiet approval. She called out to Nia, begin drafting our reform rollout. Policies, training modules, an independent diversity panel. Now Nia tapped away at her phone, sending commands into motion. Corporate downtown would activate within the hour. Guests shifted closer. They watched Elena leading staff through the lobby, explaining the new procedures. A clarity filled the room. What had felt like theater was becoming a workshop, a communal commitment to do better. In real time, a toxic precedent was dissolving. Some guests applauded, softly at first, then with growing fervor. Others wiped eyes damp with relief. A few took their phones out, not to record injustice, but commendations. New dawn at Horizon Grand. One caption read, "CEO cares enough to act." Throughout it all, Aisha didn't deliver grand speeches. She acted. The proof lay not in her words, but in the swift execution of policy and accountability. Legal teams were already drafting new accessible check-in processes. Partners in DEI workshops were being scheduled. Third-party auditors notified. Not just for show, for real. Elena caught her hand across the counter. Their eyes met. No arrogance, but mutual resolve. They moved through the lobby together, greeting guests reassured by the shift in tone. Staff who looked shaken moments ago now stood a bit more upright. The shift in leadership prompted a shift in posture. In posture prompted dignity. Meanwhile, in the sea of onlookers, cameras kept rolling, but now for a different reason. One guest spoke softly into her phone. "My grandmother was refused service here once. We just received an email from Horizon inviting her back for an apology and discount." That's change. That small outreach was just beginning. In the following days, emails went out to guests. Staff were surveyed anonymously to share bias complaints and suggestions. A permanent inclusion panel was formed, co-chaired by Aisha and Elena, with rotating guest representatives. People felt heard. Back in the lobby, Aisha addressed a small group of staff members who had volunteered to stay and see the change through. She spoke calmly. "You stayed because you believe we can do better. You'll be the foundation of that better Lauren." Once complicit in the confrontation, listened with lowered head. No dramatic redemption, just an acknowledgement of wrong and quiet willingness to learn. Aisha did not humiliate her further. Rather, she offered a path forward for those who recognized injustice and sought to repair it. The crowd began to disperse, guests returning to their travels, but not unchanged. Some stopped Elena in the hallway to say thank you. Others posted messages of support. Media requests poured in. What training did Horizon implement? Will policy change be company-wide? Aisha's team responded with details. New bias training modules, zero-tolerance enforcement, guest advisory boards. 3 months later, the change was tangible. Guest satisfaction scores climbed. Complaints about profiling dropped to near zero. Employee retention rose. Staff reported feeling more respected and aligned with core values. Elena thrived in her new leadership role. Aisha and the executive board approved the launch of a new division, Horizon Forward. It focused on measurable equity outcomes across properties. Its first project, a public accountability portal where guests could check complaint resolution status and policy updates. In that moment when guests had lifted their phones, Aisha had harnessed shared witness. But it wasn't the cameras that changed anything. It was what she chose to do after they stopped rolling. Reform, enforcement, realignment. This isn't just one hotel's story anymore, it's a blueprint. A reminder that powerful systems can be confronted and reconfigured. That leadership isn't about authority. It's about justice carried out deliberately, visibly, and with compassion. Aisha Carter didn't just reclaim her lobby. She reshaped its soul. And through that, she began to change the entire hospitality industry, one policy, one apology, one new leader at a time. The echo of that lobby confrontation did not fade into empty air. It reverberated across all 57 properties of Horizon Hospitality. But for Aisha Carter, more than ripple effects, this moment marked the birth of a movement. Her legacy wasn't measured in revenue, but in respect, and how deeply it could penetrate a system built on appearance. Months had passed since the pivotal standoff, and now every property under the Horizon banner carried the signs of transformation. Not just framed inclusion statements, but real, tangible systems built into everyday operations. A frontal approach. No more lip service. Inside the executive suite, Aisha sat across from her board. The walls were lined with certificates from independent DEI auditors, from newly established guest advisory panels, from staff recognition groups highlighting exemplary integrity. She didn't seek praise. She built accountability. Elena Ruiz, now National Guest Experience Leader, stood at a podium at the first Horizon Forward Summit. The room was filled with managers, senior staff, and invited guest advocates everywhere, hopeful faces. She cleared her throat and began, "Power in hospitality shouldn't come from how you look. It must come from how you serve with dignity." Her words resonated, and Aisha watched, not at the microphone, but at the sea of people who had chosen to believe in change. Horizon Forward's initiatives were many and immediate. Equity compliance panels, installed at each location, composed of staff and guest reps, to review any profiling or mistreatment claims. Anonymous feedback tools, digital systems letting staff and guests report bias or structural issues without fear of retribution. Rotating guest advisors, everyday guests giving input on how the hotel functions, based not on revenue level, but human experience. Mandatory training modules in empathy, cultural bias, inclusive language, refreshed quarterly and publicly logged. Training videos ran across employee screens. In-person sessions included role-playing scenarios, with staff walking in as guests in sweatpants, hoodies, no labels. Exactly like Aisha had done. Every desk, every concierge terminal, every greeting line was reprogrammed to read, "Welcome, not judge," and printed above the station. Back in the lobby of Horizon Grand, the marble gleamed just as brightly. Chandeliers still sparkled. But now, when guests entered, they were greeted by Elena, not with silent doubt, but with a warm welcome, and no one checked their outfit first. One afternoon, Aisha appeared at the front desk for real, this time in relaxed but professional attire, a navy blazer, simple earrings, and that same quiet confidence. A guest approached, looking frazzled. "I've stayed in Horizon before," she said in a low voice. "Thank you for being different." Aisha smiled and thanked her, then turned back to watch Elena as she helped a family of color check in. No pauses, no assumptions, just smooth efficiency. Meanwhile, across the country, property managers reported changes in retention rates. Former complaints flagged for guest profiling were being investigated. Some managers who'd previously been complacent now led training in their own staff, explaining what had gone wrong and how to fix it. Former employees who'd watched the transformation spoke up. "I never expected them to take action," said one, "but they did. And we believe they'll keep doing the work." Media stories poured in. National hospitality blogs ran headlines like, "Black CEO rewrites the rules of respect in luxury hotels." Even competitors reached out, wanting to learn more. Some publicly announced similar retraining programs. And yet, Aisha stayed grounded. She continued her routine, early morning visits to properties, unannounced check-ins, no entourage, just a plain black t-shirt and jeans. Dozens of staff recognized her, not because she looked like a CEO, but because she embodied change, because they saw someone who looked like them, who wasn't intimidated by tradition. At the annual Horizon Leadership Retreat, Aisha addressed thousands of employees. She spoke simply. We turned one moment of humiliation into a legacy of dignity. Never forget, respect isn't granted because of titles. It's earned or taken back. The applause was thunderous, but more powerful was the silence that followed, steady, respectful, full of recognition. Years later, the portrait of Aisha now hung in the grand lobby not as a trophy on the wall, but as a promise. This space belongs to every guest, no exceptions. Beneath it, guest complaint kiosks ceremonially labeled, "Your voice matters." Elena, now a keynote speaker at industry events, spoke of the Carter effect, how one act of resolve inspired a sweeping reform. Hotels began asking new questions. Are you serving all? Are you waiting to judge? Are you guarding access or offering it? The story spread beyond hospitality. Corporate boardrooms, universities, and civic organizations borrowed the phrase, "Hospitality begins with respect," assumed. It became a mantra, one that Aisha never advertised, but lived. Back in that original lobby, now reset by reform, guests walked in wearing every shade of humanity: business suits, sweatpants, hijabs, hoodies. They were greeted without second glances. And Aisha? She stayed modest. She still answered guest complaints personally, still trained employee trainers. But she knew this. She hadn't just reclaimed her hotel. She'd reclaimed her industry's promise. From that marble threshold to every hotel hallway across the country, a new standard now stood: dignity without qualification. And a CEO who proved that justice enacted swiftly and fairly can grow into a legacy that changes systems forever. You just watched a woman get thrown out of a hotel she owned, humiliated in front of strangers, accused of fraud, and treated like a criminal. But she didn't retaliate with anger. She responded with accountability. She responded with justice. She responded with change. Aisha Carter didn't just fire 3 employees. She dismantled an entire culture of quiet discrimination that had been allowed to fester for years. And she did it without raising her voice, only raising the standard. Because power isn't about shouting. It's about showing people who they are by how you treat them. This story isn't just about a CEO reclaiming her hotel. It's about you, about us, about every person who's ever been told, "You don't belong here." So ask yourself, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up? Would you have stood in silence? Would you have recorded? Would you have helped? Because respect shouldn't be earned through appearances. It should be assumed through humanity. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you angry, don't look away. If it made you hopeful, be part of the change. Because when one voice speaks up, it's a moment. When 1,000 voices speak together, it's a movement. Join the movement. Subscribe, like, share. And most importantly, stand up when silence is no longer an option.